Hey, DeRacers. So we're back again to talk about the final piece of the new tool that we've recently unveiled. So in the previous videos, we talked about classification and just a little bit of everything else associated with it. But today we wanted to put the final focus on the fastest average section, as well as the breeding pace scoring elements of this tool.
Now, these two particular tabs are going to focus on a couple of key things, and that's thinking about your stable and how its horse's average pace is structured, right? Who's your fastest horse based on their average pace on a furlong, as well as something called lower limits. And you'll see on some of these tools that we refer to it as either LL or lower limit. And those mean the same thing. That's essentially the average pace minus one standard deviation. And we'll dive into that here in a second. But those are the two focus points. When you're thinking about your horses, how do they stack up against each other? How fast are they in terms of average pace? But also, how fast can they go when you think about the range of times that they can throw into a particular race?
So it's critical to know about standard deviations. You should all love these things if you've been following our videos. Is that a standard deviation is approximately 35% of all instances. So if we go with an LL1, that means if we go from the average pace minus one standard deviation, there's a 35% chance that your horse is going to run in that row. Now, an LL2 would be going from that LL1 to the LL2, and you have about a 12% chance that you could run that. So what's really important to know about this is that the bigger the standard deviation, the bigger the horse's variance is, the lower it can squeak these fast runs. So let's say we're having a competition, Dirk Army's hosting something, and the goal is win. So it's not podium, not PPR, it is win. If that's the case, you don't get any points for second or third place. You need a horse that's going to be able to squeak out the best victory. So over on the far right-hand side, you're going to see the lower limit one score of each of your top five horses. So what this will tell us is that based off of a competition, if the goal was for a win rate on synthetic eights, Burra in this stable has the lowest lower limit one. So she probably will have the best chance of squeaking out a first place victory.
Now let's add to that a little bit. You've got the lower limit one of a 12 point, what is that, 102,
Yep.
which is incredible. But we also give you column M and N, and that is your amount of time or the average furlong pace that you are away from first place and third place. And that's also really important because you could look at your lower limit ones and just have a really bad stable, right? Like you could just have a stable that cannot run synth eights. And you're like, oh, okay, great. I've got a 12.102 lower limit one. Well, that doesn't really mean anything if you're really far off the third place average. You're just never going to podium. So again, this tool helps you, but you still have to understand your horses. You still have to understand your stable and have a really good sense of whether or not a pace of 12.269 is actually going to be good enough to get you onto the podium and or in first place if that was the event.
So if you're having a time trial event like that we did in the Sprints Cup, you might want to focus mostly on the average pace or this column in L, and then the race count. That's going to give you your confidence. So if you're looking for a horse that's known for running a fast pace, that's a great one. But if you're going for a PPR campaign, you might want to look at first and podium race to see which horse is really close to that. But that's the main goal of this one. Now, the other reason why we want to share this tool today was switching over as we go into breeding. If we take a look at Turf 4s, these three horses are all a little family. So Donde Albano is the foal of both Burra and Skondert, and she is technically the faster of the three horses on this one. All three horses have a good amount of experience. And then when you come over here, the paces, Donde does outpace all three horses. And then when we go to the lower limit, Donde's lower limit is also the fastest. So of what Donde has, this is the only track that she really seems to show up in compared to her parents. But this is one thing that is very important, informative, and a great segue into the other part of this tool.
Yeah, so when we think about breeding, obviously we're talking about a set of horses that end up with a foal. And right now, us only having Gen 1s, This makes life a lot easier for us to be able to reference their original data from the past, if they're Gen Zeros, with any new data coming from a Gen 1. And the new breeding pace scoring is attempting to do that. Now, the way this particular set of charts works is that we are taking each of your distances. So let's say a dirt 2, a 3, a 4, and we are going to take your average furlong pace and plot that against the community's average. So the global set of horses that are out there running have a particular pace, and that is set to 50% here. So if you have a 50 or greater, you are better than the average pace of horses on a particular track. Now we compare the dam, sire, and foal, which is the mom, dad, and the kid, and we give them a ranking as they scale up and away from, and or down and away from, that 50% mark. So in this case, I believe we have Burra 1362, which is the dam. We have Skondert, which is the sire. His ID is 1418.
Yep.
And then which foal do we have here? Is this
is Donde Albano 5020?
All right. So when we're looking at them on dirt, we can very quickly assess that in this case, Burra 1362 is very good at dirt. And then when you look at the kid, you can say, well, it falls right in between. So when you're using a tool like this to assess average furlong pace on the left and lower limit score on the right, you're actually going to be looking at two different variables that give you a score to determine whether or not your foal got the best of one parent or both parents, and or whether or not it can actually run that faster time, which is the lower limit score as well.
Now, on this note, to make sure it's understood, it's not required that you have 30 runs on every single track. This is a weighted aggregate of where you run. So if you put most of your focus on dirt 3s and 5s and less on 11s and 12s, it's going to take the amount that you've ran on the 3 and 5s, and it's going to weight those races more. So as you decide to place your horse and race your horse, these scores are going to reflect where you race it and what we have seen with all of the data sets combined.
Yes, and though the lines all do flatten, right? Like the idea is that we've made it in such a way that it's based off of that average pace. So you should see roughly a flat line as it's going left to right. That allows us to scale and weight your score evenly. So in this particular instance, for the dirt average furlong pace score, Donde, the child, which is in green, has some really good dirt 13s and 14s scores, right? Something that's up over 75 on the scoring, 100 being the best that you can get at this point. Excuse me, the 75 is incredible. However, their total score is 54.3. And that's speaking to what you're talking about here with this weighted aggregate, being able to understand that obviously for those that have been around the game a little while, those upper dirt tracks have just recently come out. So a lot of these horses have run a lot of 2 through 7, but not so much on the 8s through 15s on the dirt, which means that 13 and 14 score really hasn't pulled up the scoring for this particular foal.
Now, in my personal opinions, when it comes to breeding, especially if you're breeding inside your club or your own stable, if you have access to these horses and you're planning on breeding them multiple times, the goal should be to decimate the parents. So that line that we're talking about, that's showing here, the goal is that the foal will be able to dominate both parents, preferably on both the average and the lower limit, because you want to make sure that that horse is faster. And if you're finding that the foal is constantly just right in between that pocket, which what we're finding with Donde, basically means that the parents are better than this foal. So it doesn't necessarily mean to burn this horse, but it might mean sell it to somebody else because it could be better for their stable. But if the parents are not getting just replaced by the foal, it's basically you're just adding a horse to your stable. That's not going to make a significant change to your abilities to compete.
And then one of the last things that you can really use this tool for is assessing quickly. Again, because it's aggregating and weighting those values, you're able to determine your horse's preferred surface very quickly. So if we scroll up and down here and look at the values in the box, we've got a 54, a 49, and then a 48. We can see that the horse prefers this foal prefers dirt. But then again, like you just said, when you're looking at the dirt scores and you say, well, okay, great, it does better than the dad. It's like, well, if you own the dad, then great, go ahead and hang on to this kid. Like, it's going to be better. But if you own the mom, you are thinking, well, this doesn't really help me. You know, and that's when you have to assess whether or not it's worth hanging on to.
Perfect. Yeah. So there's a lot more that we're doing research on. This is not binary. It's not obvious necessarily to say keep it or not, but this is hopefully going to be another tool that's going to give you some insight to see how is the breeding working out. And then especially if you have multiple foals, like you and I have been breeding these two horses repeatedly. So there's been quite a few that just chucked because they're not doing what we need them to do. But once you do find a discovery and it's showing those signs of being superior to the parents, you may already notice this by classification and other elements, but this is just something else that will hopefully give you more confidence in your decisions of what you want to do with your stable.
And I highly recommend that you guys play around with this tool. Go ahead and find some of the best horses in the game, especially if they're Gen 1s. Look up their family tree, drop in the names of the parents in the upper left-hand corner, or the IDs, I should say, and take a look at them. Some of those best horses out there are running 70 plus on their scores, right? So 50 being average is good. Anything above 60 is a pretty good horse, pretty great horse on that track. But there is some horses out there that in the classification system are running a bunch of A's that are going to be 70 plus on this score. But that's the thing. This is just Gen 1s, right? We've got Gen 2s coming, and they're going to go even higher. And Gen 3s are going to go even higher. But eventually you're going to hit a cap, right? The game is going to have a speed limit at some point. We know that there is a limit on the future speed scores and things like that. So once we get to that horse with 100 speed score and I guess maybe 100 stamina or whatever that's set at, you know, we'll have the ultimate cap here, and that'll be the new 100%. But as of right now, this does give you a sense on the Gen 1s of just how much better a Gen 1 is over a Gen 0.